Well, thank you very much, Mr. Farage. And I would now like some very good contributions from the audience on the issue of should Britain leave the EU. This will hopefully last for a good hour, and I may remind the audience to make the points very clear, concise, and to give fair time allotments for individuals who speak. I shall point to members of the audience, so raise your hand, and I will try to get through as many of you as possible within the allotted time we have. Thank you.
Mr. Farage, you've repeatedly stated on behalf of your party, you even included it in your 2010 election manifesto, that Britain should, and I quote, withdraw from the EU superstate. Thank you.
That is your view, and whilst I may not agree with it, it is one which under normal circumstances would be entitled to respect. But whilst you openly suggest removing Britain from the EU, you and your UKIP colleagues appear to dismiss your Euroscepticism when it comes to lining your pockets with the £86,000 a year you earn from your roles as MEPs. I wonder if the thought of Britain leaving the EU would look quite so rosy once you're out of a job. In 2010, you attacked the newly elected President of the EU, Herman Van Rompuy, claiming he looked like a low-grade bank clerk with the charisma of a damp rat.
Well, that certainly sounds like that, yeah.
At the time, many people began to see you as the partial character that you are, but due to the fact that you, a smug, arrogant hypocrite, made these comments, means that they are incredibly rich. Finally, Mr. Farage, I ask you, as the self-proclaimed voice of the British people and the king of Euroscepticism, should the government accept your advice and leave the EU, how would you recommend that they replace the 600,000 jobs which the EU has created for Brits since 1992? How would you recommend they raise...
Is this the Labour Party handbook you're reading out?
No, it's the EU's handbook.
Oh, there we are.
How would you recommend they raise the additional prosperity they have provided every British home with £4,000 since 1992?
Oh, you're having a laugh, aren't you?
And how would you recommend they replace the £7 billion which the EU has provided to improve the private areas of Britain? And most importantly, how would you intend on earning a living?
Right, well look, there's an awful lot there. Let's deal with the last section the most quickly. I tell you what, give me 20 quid, I'll give you £10 back, and you then tell the rest of this room how rich you are. The idea that we benefited financially from being in this union is laughable, and the British public know it. It's costing us an absolute fortune in contributions, in unnecessary regulations, in the loss of our fish stocks and everything else. We are a massive financial loser being in this union. As incidentally, sir, am I. A massive financial loser by giving up a successful company in the city and becoming an MEP and earning a salary which is about 2/3 of what the local GP down the road here earns. Now, please do not think that 80,000 a year is a massive salary for anybody with real talent in modern Britain. There are nearly 50,000 GPs earning more than that. I won't embarrass the Vice-Chancellor by asking you how much he... But you know, I mean, come on, be realistic. The headmaster of the local school down the road probably gets 112,000 a year, 115,000 a year. Oh, and if you get a job running a Quango or being Chief Executive of Suffolk County Council, you get £250,000 a year. Do not tell me that I have financially benefited being a member of the European Parliament. It has cost me an absolute small fortune to do it, but I don't regret it because I've pursued a passion. And give me the opportunity to vote in the European Parliament, to sack all the MEPs, and I promise you, I'll be the turkey that votes for Christmas.
Hello. As a fan of democracy and admitting that all our politicians want to remain in the European Union, how do you imagine that Britain will leave the European Union? Do you support campaigns like the People's Pledge?
The one way that we leave the European Union is that our professional career political classes come to their senses. I don't share a great deal of optimism about that happening. Another way we leave the European Union is they expel us. You know, I perhaps offend somebody and they say, that's it, you're out. But somehow I think they want the 50 million quid a day. And I think Mercedes want to go on selling their cars in Britain trouble-free. The other way is that UKIP forms a government. Well, smashing. We did come second in the Euro elections a few years ago, but we haven't got time for UKIP to become big enough to form a government for the reasons I gave at the end of my talk. This is serious. So, the way that we get it is through a free and fair referendum. And if my friend, the first questioner, if the majority of people in a free and fair, has to be free and fair, if the majority of people in a free and fair referendum vote for us to become province number 17 of this new state, that's fine. I won't like it, but I'll stop being a bloody nuisance, I'll pack up and go and do something else. But I'm actually convinced that they wouldn't do that. So the question really is, how do we get the referendum? Now, I think that the People's Pledge, I think that Open Europe, I think that all these think tanks and pressure groups help. But actually, realistically, there's only one way we're going to get a referendum, and that is if UKIP in 2012 and 13 and 14 grows in the same way that it grew during 2011, if we get to the point where parties fear they haven't got a chance of forming a government because of the size of the UKIP vote, they will give in and they will give us a referendum. Now, traditionally, of course, it was the Labour Party that was the Eurosceptic, patriotic party in British politics. They completely gave that up with, you know, Kinnock becoming a commissioner, Mandelson, Blair, and all the rest of it. The Tory party is led by people who totally believe in EU membership. Cameron's very clear on this. 4 times now Cameron has said, despite the fact of giving us a cast iron guarantee, if you remember, that we'd have a referendum, but 4 times now Cameron has said, no, there must not be a referendum on our membership because I want us to stay in. So he's saying, sort of, damn you, I know how you're going to vote, and I'm not going to let you. But within the grassroots of the Conservative Party, certainly in this part of the country, you know, I get invited to a variety of Conservative dinners and business clubs, and they always threaten the local chairman with expulsion if this awful Farage bloke turns up, but I still go. I would honestly estimate 8 out of 10 Conservative supporters and voters in this country do not want us to be part of the EU, would like us to get a proper, sensible grip on immigration into Britain, would support the UKIP policy that grammar schools were the way to give children from poorer backgrounds the best opportunity to achieve social mobility, would agree with us that we shouldn't throw out of the window habeas corpus, our right to trial by jury, the presumption of innocence before guilt for a gang of unelected judges in Strasbourg. I go on through the UKIP manifesto. So 8 out of 10 of those Tories in southern England agree with us and not with their own leader. If they start coming to us in big numbers, if the Tory party realise they'll lose nearly every seat in Kent, for argument's sake, not Tunbridge Wells, I grant you, but they'll lose nearly every seat in Kent because of the strength of UKIP, there will be that referendum. And that's why I genuinely believe that UKIP has a big, historic role to play in British politics. We've got to be the catalyst for that change. Let's get the referendum. I'm not pretending, folks, that leaving the EU solves our problems. It doesn't solve any of them. But what it does is it gives us the ability to deal with our problems, which we currently don't have. Okay? Where are we going?
Gentleman in the centre.
Good evening, Martin.
Good evening. It's a very civilised start. Why have you done that?
My mother brought me up very well. Two-part question for you. Firstly, is it true that the EU paid our government to close down a steel plant in the northeast somewhere? And secondly, which is more likely, Daniel Hannan joining UKIP or Daniel Hannan actually getting a Westminster seat and trying to wrest control of the Tory party?
Okay, firstly the steelworks. CO2 emissions are leading to terrifying rates of global warming, and therefore what we have to do is to stop people producing CO2 and all will be well. I have absolutely no idea whether that theory is correct or not. No idea at all. And actually, if you speak to scientists, they're completely split on the issue too. But in a desperate bid to be popular, when green issues were very much in the ascendancy 10 or 15 years ago, the EU decided we'd have a whole series of targets to reduce CO2 and to increase the amount of renewables that contribute to our electricity supply. So two things have happened. Firstly, the wind farms, which I touched on, which I think are the greatest stupidity I've ever seen in my life. They don't work. Did you notice this morning how cold it was? How much wind was there? None. None. The Germans went down this road. They built 22,000 wind turbines, onshore predominantly. And last winter, when we had that big cold winter, a great big anticyclone sat over the North Sea for week after week after week with record low temperatures, record high demand for electricity and zero production from the wind farms. And the Germans this year have just built 6 new coal-fired power stations to back up the wind turbines in case we get a cold winter. Meaning that the net effect of all of this is actually increased CO2 emissions, not decreased CO2 emissions. And who makes money out of the wind farms? I'll tell you. People like Sir Reginald Sheffield, David Cameron's father-in-law, who gets 350 grand a year for having these monstrosities on his land in Lincolnshire. People like Nick Clegg's wife, who was a director of the biggest Spanish wind farm company. Who are the losers? The pensioners living in this street. Because of every electricity bill in this country, we put 15% on to subsidise the rich people who put this stuff on their land. It represents one of the greatest transfers of money from poor to rich people that we've simply ever seen. Another part of the equation was the whole business of carbon credits. Now, it is a complex thing that has become a financial instrument. But when Chorus closed, Chorus was the steel plant in Redcar. Chorus closed in fact, the year before last, I think it was now, end of 10. Chorus closed down, making 1,500 people in Redcar unemployed, which is pretty serious in a relatively depressed northeast town. For closing down the plant, Chorus were given £300 million worth of carbon credits. Have you done well? You've reduced your CO2 emissions, here's £300 million. So they give them in the form of bonds, which they can then sell onto the market. The next week, Chorus announced that they were reopening that lost capacity in India. So the net effect on CO2 emissions is zero, and what we, the British taxpayer, have done to meet our European obligations is actually to pay to deindustrialise this country. It is completely mad. I am not against sensible environmental policies. Indeed, I voted Green back in 1989, and I'm a member of all sorts of sustainable farming trusts. I do care about the environment, but the obsession with CO2 has led to a mess. Now, your last question. Look, Dan Hannan, for those that don't know Dan is a Tory MEP for this part of the world. Very bright fella. Agrees politically with nearly all of the things that UKIP do. I said to Dan last week in the lift in Strasbourg, I said, Dan, either you're in the wrong party, or I'm in the wrong party, or we're both in the wrong party. I don't know. But at some point in time, I think these issues are so fundamental that we may well see a realignment of British politics. And I think, given the 3 tired old parties now virtually represent the same thing, if there was a fresh force in British politics motivated by patriotism but without any dislike of anybody else, motivated by the idea that government is too big and that our liberties have been taken away from us, I reckon it would do very well indeed. Okay?
To find out more about who we are and what we stand for, go to the UK Independence Party website at www.ukip.org.